What's up, y'all? This is Alex Clark-Youngblood. Today we have our third episode with my younger sister, Morgan Clark-Youngblood. With this podcast, I'm posting these episodes in chronological order of when I met these people. So mom, number one, first person I met. Older sister, number two, second person I met. Technically, Morgan is not, my younger sister is not the third person I met, but she truly is like the third person I ever loved. I grew up with her my entire life, just as I did my older sister. But technically, I met my dad and my older siblings on my dad's side before I met Morgan. As I mentioned in Katie's episode, Morgan is actually my only full sibling. Katie, although I grew up with her my entire life, we have different fathers, but I consider both of them my full siblings. We all grew up together in Atlanta, being raised by my mom, all three of us. Morgan's an incredible person. When we recorded this, she's done some incredible stuff in her academic and professional life and continues to do so. When we recorded this episode, we recorded it in January of 2017 at my mom's house in Atlanta, right before Morgan left to run a refugee camp in Greece for Syrian refugees displaced by the Syrian civil war. And she had done a bunch of crazy, really admirable professional shit before that and after that. As I said, this was recorded 3 years ago when she was 26 years old, keep in mind. Really just a baby still. And, you know, she's done even more impressive shit since then. But I respect the hell out of this person. She's my hero in a lot of ways. My younger sister is my hero in a lot of ways. I love her very much and I find her an incredibly impressive human being. And she's just gonna talk to us about her life, and the kind of theme that runs through this episode is some of the cool professional stuff she's done, in her efforts to save the world. So here she is, Morgan Clark-Youngblood. I'm here today with none other than Morgan Clark-Youngblood, my younger sister, who is mere hours away from heading off to Greece to work in a refugee camp for Syrian refugees. This is just the latest in her many stops on her whirlwind tour of nonprofit work around the world, which is going to be the focus of our conversation today. So Morgan, on the eve of heading off to working in the Syrian refugee camp, how are you feeling?
Ooh, I feel nervous.
Why nervous?
I guess, I don't know, it's scary going to new places. I don't know if I'll be able to do good work. Who knows? I don't know who I'll meet. But I'm also excited because all of those questions exist. So,
well, this isn't your first foray into uncharted territory. You've been to, I would say, more precarious places and worked for extended periods of time in more precarious places than
very, very true.
A beach town in Greece.
This is true. I don't know why the other places. Maybe, I think I've talked about this many times this year. I think as you get older, you get I guess from experience, you get more nervous. You know, things might not be as easy. So I don't know why I'm more nervous. It's also only 3 months for sure, which is, it's hard to put down roots. That kind of feels like a trip, a vacation, 3 months. Mm-hmm. And it's really important for me to get involved in a community. So I like to make friends. I like to know who my neighbors are. I like to, so I think the 3 months part is scary. It's also the people I'll be working with and be working for. I feel like it takes 3 months or even years or a year to get to know people. So. Just
establish those relationships.
Exactly.
Yeah, it is a short-term venture. What exactly are you going to be doing?
So I'll be working on an infant feeding and breastfeeding program. So young child and women's nutrition in a refugee camp. That's been around now, I guess, almost 3 years. So people who've been living there for 3 years, or I guess 3 to 2 years, and connecting them to different services, making sure they have the things they need to be happy, healthy mothers and children.
And I mentioned half jokingly that you're going to a beach town in Greece, and it's a beach town in Greece. And from my limited knowledge of Syrian refugee camps in Greece, they actually are located in like ironically picturesque locations. But other than the picturesque location,
tell me about what's this like structural setup of the refugee camp? Are we talking tents, in permanent housing? What's that looking like?
That's a good question, and I guess those are one of the reasons I'm a bit nervous. The refugee crisis in Greece is all over the place, so having contact and communication with people in the field, I have a lot of missing pieces. But from what I understand is it's about 400 to 500 refugees in this camp. Some of them are in tents, and then some of them makeshift housing is now being built. So the refugees themselves, along with other volunteers, there's a lot of volunteers in the camps, are building these makeshift houses, but not as nice as a trailer. To me, it kind of looks like a storage box, like those
the makeshift houses.
The makeshift houses.
And that would be an upgrade from the tent?
That's an upgrade from the tent, because you have a harder roof. You're probably not as affected by wind and inclement weather. And I think they all were supposed to be in these more makeshift houses, as well as have heating, but they're only allowed to have stoves outside of the house because of fire reasons. Because Greece had a really bad winter, so the Greek government had promised to winterize all the camps, but many are still in tents.
And that's who's running the show here, is the Greek government?
Yeah, with influence from different actors, so large nonprofit or humanitarian, but the Greek government's in charge of everything, and I think actually the Greek military is in charge of many of the different
specifically the institution within the Greek government's Greek military.
Yeah. So, and you can't really, as humanitarian actors, you can't really do much to overstep the government's always the most in charge.
Right.
Is the highest power.
They have the final say in all of it.
Yeah, and you have to kind of, it's a balance. You have to, try to push for things, but you also don't want to get kicked out because they can kick you out.
Right.
So
I know you don't know exactly yet, but what do you anticipate your day-to-day looking like? You're going to be working like with the refugees on the ground in the camps on a daily basis?
Yeah, I hope so. So our office is in this beach town, which is about 45 minutes from Athens and 20 minutes from the camp. The camp is more inland than the town. So I think I'll be mostly in the camp every day. I'm also overseeing a team of volunteers, so I'm sure the volunteers who are there for about 3 weeks, a month, it's people who've taken off work, so their vacation time.
Right.
I'm sure they want to be in the camp, and that's where I think help is needed.
You're going to be working specifically with women and children?
Yep, so with women and children, make sure setting up safe spaces for them to breastfeed, and also peer support among women has been shown to really help child nutrition and also breastfeeding adherence. So
peer support meaning like refugee to refugee, or peer
mother
support?
to mother.
Mother to mother.
Yeah.
So we'll be working exclusively with mothers.
Only with mothers. Yeah. I doubt I'll work much with men. And then also doctors. So there are doctors that come in, I think, 3 times a week to the camp. So, if you identify any cases that need to be referred to a doctor, refer them to the doctor.
Right.
Yeah, or nurse.
This is not your first foray, as I said, into international nonprofit work. Tell us a little bit about what you're now, as years of 2017. You're now 26 years old.
Yes.
You graduated from George Washington University when you were 21?
Just turned 22, yeah.
22. So for the past 4.5 years, this has been the focus of your professional endeavor. So give us a brief timeline and overview from what you've gotten involved in.
Sure. So between my sophomore and junior year, so 2010, I interned in Honduras with an organization that you also know well, the Organization for Youth Empowerment in Honduras. And I worked on, with a Honduran colleague there, a socioeconomic survey, kind of an environmental scan of the students they work with. And then I kept going back to Honduras for a few years until 2012, every summer, and worked on different community-based projects, mostly looking at health in El Progreso, Honduras. And then afterwards, I worked for a great organization called Population Services International, or in Central America. It's the Pan American Social Marketing Organization. I worked there, and then I worked...
That was also in Honduras?
Also in Honduras and San Pedro Sula, but all over the country, which was cool to travel and get to see different parts of the country. And I worked there with youth in the Department of Education on a teen pregnancy program. And then I moved to Ecuador, Quito, which is a great place, and worked with Colombian refugees there on a food security project. And then I moved to New York and worked with Planned Parenthood on projects in Latin America region and African region, but on not teen pregnancy, just pregnancy prevention and access to sexual and reproductive health services. And now I'm here.
That was in the big city. That was in New York City.
That was New York City.
And from what I understand, and I was with you for about a year. Well, I was with you when you're still in college working in Honduras. I came down and helped you out on that survey that you mentioned for a couple months.
Yep.
And then I was with you for almost a year
afterwards.
During your second stint when you were in San Pedro Sula. I was working for a nonprofit in Honduras. So I was intimately familiar with the type of work you were doing. And I visited you in Quito when you were working with the UN and the Colombian refugees. And it seems to me, as your nonprofit career has progressed, you've stayed within women's and reproductive health.
Yeah.
But it's gotten progressively less hands-on, hasn't it?
Yeah, for sure. It's just kind of the nature of nonprofit work, I guess. The field workers are seen as the bottom of the totem pole. So,
that's where you started out.
Yeah, so I was trying to move up, but as I've gotten less and less from field, I've enjoyed it less and less. I like being with the people. I think it's also where I shine and where I'm most creative and where I'm most effective. I like to be stressed out. And I know some people are like, you shouldn't be stressed, but I guess I'm not stressed out, but I like to be busy and I like to have big challenges to solve. I work a lot more efficiently. I don't work so efficiently when things aren't as hard. So hopefully I'll have big challenges ahead. So that's good.
In your most recent start with Planned Parenthood, you were working in like an office in Manhattan, right?
Yeah,
you're separated almost entirely from like the work that's going on the ground, right?
Yeah, because then you have country offices for the different Latin American and African the countries we work in. Then you had regional offices, and then you had headquarters. So, for me, not everyone. I know plenty of people who like the highest, being in the highest office, because you're usually, if you have that position, you can make more drastic changes, wide sweeping changes. But for me, it was way too far from the projects and not action packed enough. I know some people would rather not have that action packed. That stresses them out. But it was funny. You have different stresses in office, but it wasn't things that really stressed me out. Whereas I guess when you're in the field, you really, or just as a teacher or a doctor, you really see how your actions affect other human beings, and so you're dealing more with other human beings' livelihoods. Which I always liked a little bit more. And
this most recent venture is a return to your roots.
Yeah.
And in fact, it seems like it's going to be the most hands-on, right?
Yeah.
Of anything you've ever done.
I think so, and I'm afraid that also I'm the most afraid of it, I think, too, because, these are people, a language they won't speak a language I speak, or some of them might speak
That's
English,
true. In the past, you speak Spanish. In the past, you worked with Latino communities.
And as I mentioned, for me, like, building relationships with people is really important, and listening to their story. And, I think what a person's been through, you can really mold their care or, the intervention you're going to, has it been turned on?
Keep going.
Mold, their intervention based on what they've been through. It's also important to know those stories because, like, as a person in New York or DC, you could have a much more significant impact, but you also don't know the realities of the people who you're writing projects for, or creating an investigation for. So it was difficult for me because being part of a community is really important. I'd rather work, in a small town in the middle of nowhere and be connected to a community than Well, that's not totally true, but because for personal reasons, that's hard. But
for personal reasons, it's hard to be that isolated. But for professionally, it's more satisfying to be on the ground.
Yeah, and so maybe then personally, it's more satisfying.
So where did you feel that thus far in your 3 stops along the way, and I guess include college as well? Where have you felt the most satisfied from looking from a whole life perspective, professionally, personally, everything? Where have you felt the most satisfied?
That's difficult because I think where I felt more satisfied professionally, it was more of a difficult personal situation, and personally not as difficult as a professional. So I guess either Honduras or Quito. Honduras, I really liked my job. I really liked the projects. I think the organization was inventive and creative, and doing good work. The work was actually there was need for the work and it was having an impact. And then in Quito, I had a really good time in Quito, and the work was cool too. I knew vaguely about the Colombian crisis, but Colombian conflict, but I didn't really know that much, and I felt very fortunate to hear people's stories and hear how whole villages and a whole entire country has been struggling with a conflict for.
Can you get into that conflict briefly for those that don't know?
Yeah, sure. So, well, I won't get too into it because I don't want to. I'm not an expert on the Colombian conflict, but briefly or vaguely. So hopefully Colombia will sign a peace deal this year between the FARC and the Colombian state. But currently the FARC.
The FARC is a Marxist rebel group, right?
Yep. And so throughout the almost 30 years they've been in existence in Colombia, they've controlled different areas of Colombia, and they've had peace deal after peace deal or accord with the Colombian government to try to pacify the war, because they worked as a guerrilla group. So they would go into mostly rural areas, target children a lot of the time, and form different soldier groups. And the people who were part of these militant groups often were, they couldn't communicate with their family, they couldn't have children, they couldn't have relationships within the FARC. If you were recruited as a child, you also were basically brainwashed from when you were little to, the FARC is your family. But you couldn't have any normal human experience that you would have growing up.
Mm-hmm.
Relationships were completely forbidden. If you wanted to be a mother, you were forced to have abortions. You couldn't have contact with any of your family. And so what the FARC has been for I don't know how many years, pieces of Colombia were considered FARC land. So the people who controlled the towns that were in that land were FARC run. They weren't, the Colombian laws and government didn't have, what I understand, didn't have influence on it. So you would have the FARC come in to different communities. So the refugees I worked with were fleeing from Colombia to Ecuador, and they came for a variety of different reasons. Maybe the FARC had entered their land, and the FARC just said, leave here now, or you might be killed. So literally people would leave immediately. Many times they lived in the jungle or rural areas, so you're just walking through jungle trying to find Ecuador, which I couldn't do. Or perhaps you were a community leader of some sort or an indigenous leader of some sort, so the FARC targeted you. So you were going to Ecuador or fleeing Ecuador because your life was in danger. It was crazy though. I knew a group of a family of almost 20, including their children, that were indigenous leaders. And even when they crossed the border, imagine they were traveling days by foot or by bus trying to find Ecuador. And finally, when they arrived to Ecuador on the northern border with Colombia, they're in a train station or a bus station trying to find Ecuador, and they saw someone that they knew were part of the FARC just watching them. And then they would go to another bus station, and that same person or a different person was there watching them. So they would never say anything, but it's a psychological game that like we're here, we're watching
Yeah.
you. So these people find refuge because as soon as you cross the border, you have to register, but you have asylum in Ecuador. That's a international law. But imagine you think Ecuador is a very safe place, never been in war. Imagine everywhere you go, so someone just randomly pops up. People who have been threatening.
Oh, these FARC members were in Ecuador?
Yeah.
Oh,
so
wow.
they'll just pop up. This was a more important leader group. It's not
Right.
going to happen with every like farmer
Right.
that's been kicked out of their community, but like with leaders, still not rich, wealthy people, but just people that FARC had enough money to invest in the scare. They would just plant different people in Ecuador to make sure that the family saw them.
Right.
And I just,
we still have an eye on you.
And like listening to, I would visit families and listen to their story and what they needed. And it's just, sometimes you think if you were going through such conflict or such terror that you would think like, someone will help me. Like I always think about that with the Rwandan genocide. Like if people are coming in and burning down your community and, creating absolute terror, the true terrorism, that like you would think like, oh, someone must help me. Right. It's crazy, to think of like, I thought of before that, like, whoa, I never even thought of the Colombian crisis before hearing these stories. And it's crazy because what people are describing to you is absolute terror and almost torture. It's crazy to think we don't know like, the reality. Like, you feel very fortunate. I don't think everyone should give up, but you would think I think oh, if I'm being systematically tortured or have terror created in my life, you would think oh, someone for sure will intervene. I know you hear stories from Rwanda as well. People kept saying oh, someone Europe or the U.S., because those countries have been pegged as saviors, but for sure someone will help us. It's insane. So I feel very fortunate to have heard those stories. I guess I'm excited to be able to hear a few more stories. It's really lucky, I think. So, but it's insane what goes on in the world.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure how much I've actually helped, but I feel fortunate to have witnessed some things or heard stories of these people. So
go back to your time in Honduras, because I know about stories from your time in Honduras, and I think they're equally as
for sure
heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Talk about the communities that you were working with Honduras, the population that you're working with Honduras, and then get into some of that.
For sure it's something I thought of in Ecuador a lot of times, because these people or the Colombians, I think rightly so, were labeled as refugees, and I think a lot of times what happened in Central America, I know it's gotten better in certain areas, but with gang violence, it's interesting what you label is as people who deserve seeking refuge or not, because I think the U.S. has targeted Central American immigrants, and to me, the gang violence that those people experienced was similar to the violence people affected by the FARC experience. So
perhaps even more drastic.
Similar tactics. You recruit people at a really young age, the same terror, same control over communities. So I worked in communities labeled by the U.S. as the most dangerous. And
this is in San Pedro Sula, which at the time, I think you moved, and Tegucigalpa. Yeah. At the time when you began working there, San Pedro Sula, well, Honduras as a country had the highest murder rate of any country in the planet, and then San Pedro Sula was the most dangerous city within that country. So, aside from a country that's in the midst of an armed conflict like Fallujah or Afghanistan or something like that, these are the most. San Pedro Sula could be considered the most dangerous city in the world. So talk about the neighborhoods that you worked in, and the people that you worked with. You said the U.S. had labeled these neighborhoods as...
Yeah, so it was, but this project was part of a larger violence prevention intervention. So we focus on sexual and reproductive health among adolescents, but other people working on job creation, making school retention, those kinds of things. So we all work together in these neighborhoods with high gang presence and then a very high murder rate as well. So we worked with local community centers in those areas, as well as teachers in schools. So the National Board of Education, local Board of Education, and then we're also supposed to reach kids that were not in school and not working, which for me is an example, a well-intentioned population to reach. But an example of how people in DC or New York don't know the realities of the country where you're writing the proposal for, because that's basically impossible to do in Honduras without risking the workers' lives or our workers' lives. Because you basically would have to go door to door. Where our kids who don't work and don't study, they're deep in their neighborhoods and they're at their houses.
And these are neighborhoods that it's not exactly the best idea to go door to door. So like stories where we had surveyors there, that our surveyors were carrying tablets, which we told them, because this was a contract out from a different company, we told them that's probably not a good idea. Surveyors who were kidnapped. We had educators. When you rolled into many of the communities, there's someone at the entrance of the community checking everyone who comes in and comes out. And they knew our van, but a lot of our educators... And these are not government officials.
No, exactly. They're the gang who runs the neighborhoods.
So gangs are literally like checking each vehicle that enters the neighborhood to make sure that like this person's on our like go list, right, or not on our blacklist.
This person's from the community. Because like if you're selling things, if you're a bus driver in the community, like you pay taxes. You pay what they call war taxes in Spanish, impuestos de guerra. So because they knew we were an NGO and helping the communities, we usually got the okay. But I know a few times they would see us. There's all these invisible lines from the different gangs control different parts of the community, and a few times our educators got in trouble because they saw them entering one gang's region controlled area, and the opposing gang didn't like that we were also helping that community. I know some of our educators got held up and searched their car, but like with an AK-47, not just with a knife or a pistol, but shoved against the wall while their car searched, and they're just trying to do really sex ed.
And this is like day-to-day stuff.
Day-to-day stuff, yeah. I remember one time we got called by the surveyor, and she's like, someone's giving me refuge in their house, and they're hiding us, but like the gangs are looking for us, and so we had to go in and do like a covert operation
to sneak them out, sneak them out the back door.
Yeah. So,
and you've seen crazy shit personally.
Yeah. So outside of our office, was in nice areas. 2 people, I believe, got killed right outside of our office. Driving into communities, you saw dead bodies. I was at a friend's house and someone came over and like his head had been shot, so bleeding, but he also had a gun in his hand. So asking for help, but having to make the decision because we were with little kids not to help the person. In the bus you would see dead bodies. So.
And this is not like an active war zone. We're not talking about Afghanistan, Iraq, or Syria here. We're talking about a 22, 23-year-old nonprofit worker working in, a major metropolitan area in Central America. This is what life is like hundreds of miles below the U.S. border.
Exactly. Incredibly close. So close. A very short plane ride. I mean, it's a shorter plane ride than going to California or something. Yeah,
when I used to live in Phoenix, and it was a shorter plane ride for me to go from Phoenix down to Honduras than it was for me to go from Phoenix back home to Atlanta. This is so close.
And it's interesting, again, working in Ecuador with Colombian refugees, those people definitely deserved refuge and asylum, but it was interesting to compare the two. what the Colombians described they went through, and then I was like, what I know my friends and neighbors went through in Honduras. It's interesting that the Hondurans really had no one welcoming them, and nowhere to go. And it's not just Honduras; it's many other countries in Central America too. Yeah.
So what do you foresee your future as then? Do you anticipate staying in this line of work and nonprofit work, I guess, in general, and then more specifically in women's and reproductive health? What do you envision?
Yeah, I really like working with adolescents. I really like working in women's health, more sexual and reproductive health, especially pregnancy prevention. So right now, I would like to have more clinical skills and be able to work in the field. I think that's where I'm most happy and where I thrive. But it's also kind of scary because I've enjoyed, but I've also been unsatisfied in my career in nonprofit work, but very passionate about the work I do. So it's kind of weird to maybe make a career shift, but maybe I won't make a shift, but maybe going back to school will just make me a stronger worker, but also someone to give more skills. Like when I was going to Greece and talking to different people, like what we really need are nurses and especially and doctors and especially people who can work in women's health, give OBGYN care. Because sometimes you go and while I know I have a lot of background and experience for my age, you still feel like, I hope I can actually help in some way. So it'd be really cool to have like a clinical skill that many people don't have.
More specifically skilled labor.
Yeah. More skilled.
At the moment, you study, well, talk about what you study.
I studied public health in undergrad and then I have my master's in public health as well. And more specifically maternal and child health. So
and that's from what I'm kind of gathering from what you're saying, that's more of like a generalized education, you feel. Yeah,
well, it's in program implementation and or research, lots of biostats and epidemiology type work, which has been really great, serviced me to this point. And if I wanted to continue working in nonprofit work, of course, only working would give me more skill. But if I wanted still be more community based. So it's a balancing act. So being community based, but also making a living where I'm not always worried all the time. So I think
because more from a financial standpoint,
right. So more clinical skills would bring a bit more security, but allow me to.
So to obtain more financial security, kind of continuing down the same professional path that you've already gone, you're almost pigeonholed into working in an office.
Right, and working in headquarters. And it's funny because I can sit down and study for hours on end. So I never I never questioned whether I had ADD or not. But really working in an office and behind a computer, I feel like, and this sounds dramatic, but like kills my work ability and kills me a bit. It really,
I feel you. I'm the same way.
It really feels like, someone's killing part of my being.
I feel the exact same way.
And so the only time I've been happy was when I was like planning an event or like I had to organize a bunch of people. But like on a daily basis, even though the work is doing good, I feel hyperactive there. Like I can't concentrate. And I also don't feel. I know I'm smart and I know I'm efficient, and I know I'm an effective worker. But there, I really don't feel that way. So
you don't get that like day-to-day professional satisfaction.
Exactly, and I don't feel like I work as well either.
So you want to stay in this line of work, but you want to find a way to keep your hands dirty.
Yeah.
But at the same time, be able to support yourself financially.
Right.
Perhaps eventually, like, start a family.
Yeah.
And in order to do that, you either have to go to an office job or you need to advance your skill set so your skills are more valuable and you continue working on the ground.
Exactly.
So what are you thinking about?
So I was just accepted to a midwifery program at Emory, but that would include getting a bachelor's in nursing and a master's in nursing. So then you're at nurse practitioner level, and then you specialize in women's health and reproductive health. So midwifery it's a totally different model than OBGYN or doctors operate under a medical model and nurses operate under a nursing model. So technically in the U.S. I have almost or more training than a doctor, but it's a totally different belief system on how to approach your patients. So you treat the whole being and life cycle, and whereas a doctor treats disease and like specific parts of a body.
Right.
So it's exciting that it kind of stinks to go back to school.
Yeah.
To be poor for 3 more years,
Right.
but I guess in the end it pays off.
Right.
And we have to work for a long time, so I guess it's good not to work somewhere for 40 years.
Yeah, it gives you more flexibility what you're able to do going forward.
Exactly.
But do you want to continue this line of work? Do you want to think
Yeah,
you want to continue internationally?
I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't know. I'm open to either. Emory has a lot of programs abroad. They're like Johns Hopkins or Columbia. They finance a lot of different programs abroad. So I'm sure I could get involved. But Atlanta would be an interesting place to go back to school because there's a lot of interesting communities here.
Yeah, there's plenty of diversity to be
Yeah.
found.
Yeah.
How did you get into this line of work, and what is your continuing motivation to stay in this line of work? Because it sounds like you have experienced frustrations and dissatisfaction.
Yeah.
What is it that initially brought you into this line of work, do you think, and what is it that is keeping you in it?
Ooh, those are good questions. So initially I was attracted more to the public health or health on like healthy eating and that nutrition and physical activity really can affect your whole being, but also access to like quality health care can really change someone's course of life and their success in life too, their impact on their community. So I was initially drawn to that. And that came from being diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at a young age. And
How old were you?
At 13 or 13. Yeah, and really have seen how food not only could affect my body, but also your health and access to quality medicine really could affect my entire life and what I could do in life. So there was an interest in that. And programming, like the programmatic aspect, and I think behavior change too. But actually when I went to Honduras, I'd taken a few public health classes when I went to Honduras for the first time.
When you were still in school?
When I was still in school, I had just began taking public health courses, and still I think was committed to like nutrition and physical activity, like healthy communities type work. But in Honduras, I met a lot of young mothers and a lot of teen mothers, and it really just hit me that something that's so taboo in our society, which is sex, has such an impact on a person's life, especially in certain countries on women's lives, that, you know, in Honduras, the people I saw, once they got pregnant, it was almost like a poverty sentence for them, because most of them couldn't continue their education, and usually that was high school education. They couldn't work because they had children. Where do you put your children if you're at work? It's not like the U.S. or North America or Europe where there's daycares everywhere, especially in El Progreso. And so I was really... also, your health can be dramatically affected just through the pregnancy and birthing process as well. And it's something that only affects women. And also I saw the transition of women going from being women to only looked at as mothers. So kind of, I was interested like socially, that loss of identity. And their role really only became motherhood. They weren't seen to be able to do anything else. So I just found it so interesting, all these social aspects really impacted someone's livelihood, their ability to create a life for themselves and their children, and the burden that it's on motherhood. And that having worked in it more, there's a fascination in society for people to want to control women's choices. There's a lot of science out there to allow women to choose and to be able to plan their
There's a lot of science that supports that.
Well, science that supports it, but also scientific creations that could allow women to choose how many and when they want to have children.
Scientific, like medical advancements.
Right. But because of different beliefs, or even in our own country, really been people's access to information as well as services has really been limited, and it's sad because it's possible to you can't prevent every pregnancy, but prevent unwanted pregnancies, especially among young people. So it just has always fascinated me that control. There's so many scientifically proven ways it's not something where we don't have a solution for. Mm-hmm. Some diseases or health outcomes we don't have solutions for, but this is something we really have ways to prevent.
The technology exists.
Yeah. I don't know if it's interesting too, because education's always been part of our family, and it's something that's not just totally scientific. You really have to have education and effective didactic ways or materials to get these messages across. Mm-hmm. I just find it fascinating. It's such a taboo topic, but it really affects women in so many. Mm-hmm. It affects their whole life.
Yeah.
You've mentioned briefly, you touched on briefly about your dissatisfaction with this type of work, and obviously you just delineated your motivations and your satisfaction and successes in this line of work. I too have worked in the nonprofit world and have worked primarily throughout my professional life in disadvantaged communities.
Yeah.
And I found a lot of frustration and dissatisfaction in that world as well. And I'm at this transition point in my life where I can tell that I am transitioning away, especially from the nonprofit world. Yeah. Primarily because I see a lot of inefficiency. I see a lot of lack of motivation. I feel like I find a lot of people that think just because they're in an altruistic line of work, like that's enough of accomplishment within itself. And there's almost not an incentive to truly do the good work that is absolutely necessary to be done, because people feel like, well, I'm working in an altruistic profession. I don't really need to bust my ass on a daily basis. Yeah. And I found that very frustrating. Talk to me about what dissatisfactions and frustrations you have experienced in the nonprofit world and how you've kind of overcome them or in the process of overcoming them.
Yeah, I feel like I've been really fortunate. I've worked for large nonprofits or organizations, so I feel like there's inherently a very competitive. The people I've been fortunate enough to work with, the vast majority, are very hardworking, competitive people. What's been frustrating is more the system, the bureaucratic nature of it, inability to change things. But it's frustrating, but I also, people working hard, I can understand would be more frustrating. But the systems aspect, I can't think, because there should be a lot of check marks to make sure that, that corruption doesn't happen. It's really, you really have to work with governments. You're working with multiple, so you're working with the people, you're working with governments, and then you also have your own, board of directors and stuff too. So there's many people you have to satisfy. So
a lot of voices in the room.
That inherently makes things move slower. And you also have your donor, so you're not turning a profit. Most nonprofits aren't. I guess they never are, but they're not creating profits to be reinvested. So you're also at the mercy of your donor, which is the most frustrating. But where I've worked, I've always worked with very committed people, and I think some people who have sacrificed a lot too. So the slow-moving machine of nonprofit work is very frustrating, but I can't think of a better system currently, like while working with governments, that would make a nonprofit, where I worked at least, maybe not all nonprofits, where I worked, run better. I guess when you work at a place or work with people and you can list and identify X, Y, and Z or a game plan to make it run better, I think that's where it gets really frustrating. I've also thought about, perhaps I could work for for-profit places.
In this same line of work?
No, I guess just in any kind of line of work. But I can't imagine. I can't imagine wanting or being motivated by making someone else more wealthy. I am motivated by what I've done. Like I really work in my passion. So I don't think working outside of that area I would be happy. I feel happy to know, like, okay, I've done a lot to work towards something I see a problem in our society, that I've worked towards making it hopefully a little bit better. I think there's a lot of like consultancy groups, especially like in research, that are for profit, that have done work very efficiently. You see different organizations, like the first organization I worked for, my full-time job, ran on a business model. So I think you see a lot of more innovative nonprofits that will be leaders running off of a business model. So that means that you put the clients at the center of your decision making, whereas before, it's funny, it seems unnatural, but you didn't put the beneficiaries at the center of your project planning. Now you do a human-centered or client-centered design, which is a business model. So I've worked at places, except one, that have run almost like a business, except they don't turn a profit.
Right. You said you could never envision yourself working to enrich someone else. Do you ever envision yourself being able to work to enrich yourself?
Well, so I worry a lot, if you didn't know.
I know that about you. The listeners may not, but yes, that's true. You're pretty neurotic.
So I'm not sure that's the best lifestyle balance for me.
Why not?
Because I think I would never stop working.
If you were the center of, if your own financial gain was the center of your work.
Yeah, and I don't think I would. I like have found a balance. I like, okay, it's good to stop working. Because like when I went to school and stuff, like I enjoyed some parts of school, but like I worked all the time. Like I definitely was one of the, maybe besides a few other people, like the hardest worker I knew in school and stuff. So, but school is never ending too. So I know that it's probably not the best work-life balance.
So in fact, it's like this almost kind of irony to the fact that when you're working in a profession that inherently requires self-sacrifice, it actually allows yourself space for not self-indulgence, but to focus on yourself. Because it gets to a point where you're sacrificing yourself so much, you're like, oh shit, I need to stop, take a step back, and allow myself to reset. Whereas if you were working in a profession where you were working for your own gain on a daily basis, you wouldn't be able to take this step back and focus on yourself.
Or you could found people have talked to me about like founding a nonprofit and stuff. I know that's not. There's certain things would not be healthy for you, and I know those things would not be. Running
your own show wouldn't work for you.
I don't think so.
Wow.
I like to be in charge, and I know I'm good at being in charge, but I don't think it would. Because I don't think I would be able to. I've worked with a lot of people who can stop worrying or are good at working and taking personal time. I know that I need that. Like, okay, I'm only getting paid for 40 hours a week.
Right.
Because I'm fine taking vacation, which I know a lot of Americans aren't. But like, if you tell me I'm entitled to 14 days vacation or 30, I'm going to take all of them. You know.
Right.
Because that's what you paid me for. I like that. You tell me how much you want me to work and I'll do it. Otherwise, like,
if there's not a limit on how much you could work, you're just going to allow it to inundate your life.
Yeah. That's why I'm also excited to, like, now that I've learned these things about myself, like, I'll be interested if I do go back to school, if I can cut it off.
The academics.
Right, or like not have to like worry about it all the time.
Right.
You know? So we'll see.
To close it out here, what role do you think your family has played in the line of work that you've gotten into, if any?
Good question. So I think growing up, we always thought, we're told, even though I'm not sure if it's true, that, I feel like we were raised that we had to take a job bettering our community, or I guess it's, people take it more broadly, like serving humanity in some way. So I didn't really...
Who was telling you these things?
My mother, lovely mother. So...
It wasn't your father, huh?
That's
fun. It was not. It's funny. Morgan and I were both raised by a single mother, so these messages that she's alluding to were definitely things that were drilled into our head from a very young age.
Yeah.
That a professional effort should be focused on helping others, not ourselves. Go ahead, talk more about that.
So I just think it's funny because I think other people are drilled into their heads. Like, how many friends are like, you have to be a doctor, a lawyer, or major in business. So I'm not sure. I'm sure in the end she would be happy if we majored in business or some corporate lawyer or something. But I think that would have terrified her more than saying, like, I'm going to move somewhere and work for $500.
Did you feel any pressure, like graduating high school? Did you feel like you had any other options?
It's always what I never had. This year was the first time where I wasn't totally sure what I wanted to do with, like, my professional life. I've always known what I wanted to do, and I think also being diagnosed with diabetes at a young age, because it's a hard thing to deal with, but I kind of took it, okay, why did I get diagnosed with this? Like, how can how can I offer, like, from what I've learned, give back to others or support others in some way? So, yeah, it never was a question. And this is the first year I really, like, questioned, like, what am I supposed to be doing? Before, I always knew, like, what I wanted to do, always, knew what kind of work I wanted to do and what I was passionate about. I run off a lot of passion and enthusiasm. And so I think I was less enthusiastic about what I was doing this year, and so that really...
Because your most recent venture, you were kind of office-bound.
Right, exactly. So I think having a lack of enthusiasm and passion kind of threw me off. It made me less productive, and it questioned what I was doing. And like also going through my work, being raised by a single mother really influenced my work. Also working with women and in making sure that people are having the children when they want and how many they want, and have what's necessary to have children too. I mean, it's hard on women, and it's hard on children too, and we're lucky that we had so much love, attention, and support, but most people raised by single mothers really don't get that, and that affects all of society and their livelihoods too. It affects their potential and what they can do. So it's really incredible what the family structure can do, and I think that. We are totally fortunate enough to be inundated with care and support, and messages that we should give back to the community. I think that's why I also never questioned what I was doing before. Like, I never thought, like, oh, I should go into corporate consulting or other things like that.
So you're raised by the single mom who instilled all these messages in you. Talk to me about your relationship with your father, or lack thereof, and how has that influenced you?
So, not really much. I don't know. I've thought of it, I guess, a lot, but for some reason I haven't really struggled. I see it like it would be nice to have a dad, but it's hard to miss what you never had. Like, I also, like, you don't miss driving a Porsche if you've never driven a Porsche. Right. You know what I mean? Like, so for me, like, I always thought, oh yeah, it would be nice, but I didn't really think of it. Like, I remember when I was in first grade, someone asked me like, "Oh, where's your dad?" And I just said, "Dad, I don't have a dad." Like I just thought like it's mom. Like to me, it wasn't weird or anything. So, yeah, and again because our mom was such a strong presence in our life. I always say that I think she did a much better job than many of my friends who have two parents. You know, like some people are made to raise and support others, and you know, that's part of her being, and she's really good at it, and she had to sacrifice a lot, I know, to give us all the care and support that we had, but I think other people are more centered on themselves, so, you know, some parents are not willing to give up certain aspects of their life, which might be fine as well, but we are really fortunate.
Speaking of which, we don't really know our father, but we have a vague idea, and I think primarily our idea of him was formed out of the lack of relationship we had from him.
Yeah.
Like, I think at a young age you don't really give him much consideration, but as you move into adolescence and adulthood, you start to realize, like, man, that's kind of a fucked up situation.
Yeah.
He was never around. He never provided any financial support.
Yeah.
And then we start to hear stories of drug and alcohol abuse and legal troubles and these sorts of things. You start to get a more clear picture of who this guy might have been or still is, and it's not exactly the prettiest picture. I know in a lot of ways that has also contributed to what I have done thus far in my life.
Yeah.
Certainly our mom's influence instilling that altruism in us from a young age played a role, but I also know there was this active effort on my part to be as opposite of my father as I could.
Right, yeah.
Have you ever felt any of that?
Maybe because I'm a woman. No. I guess sometimes there's like, I have like the worry, surprise. I'm like, because I've heard all these stories, X, Y, and Z, I'm like, well, like it's, you have a dad and a mom, so you always have pieces of your dad. And to me, what I've always been fascinated about him is the detachment, and I know there's like a lot of psychological and addiction you could be dealing with to not be attached to things. So sometimes it worries when like I don't feel emotion for certain things. I'm like, oh fuck, I hope I'm not detached.
Mm-hmm.
But
is it in my blood?
yeah. But like as I get older and as you have a greater sense of self, I'm less worried about it.
Mm-hmm.
There's certain things that I assume come from my dad that I think are good things. Like it's really hard to anger me. I'm really laid back. And I'm glad I don't experience much anger. So I experience worry and stuff, but I feel like I can deal with a lot.
Mm-hmm. You go with the flow.
I go with the flow a lot. So, I feel like I'm happy for. I'm like, because I remember growing up and we have a loud family. And everyone, I feel like, always experienced so much emotion for certain things that were going on. And I remember thinking, like, what the fuck is the problem? Like, what's going on? Why is everyone feeling so much or, like, getting unrattled for certain things? Because, like, for me, it wouldn't affect me, you know? So when people would get angry over certain situations, I like that I felt was missing. So I kind of like my go-with-the-flow personality. So there's certain things that I like that I don't think come from the family I grew up in.
Certain things are perhaps nature, not nurture.
Yeah, exactly. And there's something I was gonna add to that too, about the dad piece. Oh, there's certain things that you can worry about and obsess, and I'm trying to put this into practice more. Or focus on in life that you can change, or certain people you can surround yourself with or do to make yourself a better person. And I never really felt like focusing on him, someone I'm never really going to have, I don't see potential of having a relationship, or focusing on that I didn't have a father, or things he's done to us, not going to make it's not going to make my life better or make me a stronger, better person. So I kind of don't think about certain things. You know, like the lawsuit and the money thing, like if you think about it, it can make you angry, but there's nothing I can really do about it now. Mm-hmm. So I just, okay, move on, you know? And again, like, now that I see friends with dads, like, oh yeah, it would be nice to have another relationship. It's always good to have more loving, caring people in your life, but I don't feel a void from it because I never had it, you know?
Right.
It was never reality for me. So
if you've never driven a Porsche, you can't miss driving.
Made that up right on the spot.
Exactly. And an awesome place to end. Thank you so much for joining us.
Of course.
I wish you the best of luck in Greece.
Thanks. Keep
maybe
your head
we'll
down.
Yeah, I want to do a wrap-up show when we come back. Oh, yeah, or a remote. That could be nice.
Yeah.
Or maybe I'll come join you and get some interviews for some refugees.
That would be cool. From the beaches. They need communication volunteers. So.
That could be me. All right, man.
Next.
Thank you. I love you.
I love you too. One skill I need to develop is not crying.
Everyone has cried on the Youngwood University podcast.
Who was number one? Gina.
Gina cried.
Well, there's certain things that I'm like, fuck, interviewing all